Welcome to another episode of the Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and this week I have movement visionary, inventor of the BOSU Ball, David Weck, the inventor of the WeckMethod. Welcome, David.
Well, Deb, nice to see you. I see you flying online and it's beautiful to watch.
Thank you. You really kept me going. There were moments in my journey where there would be something you expressed on your social media that then led me to go do a training at your place and just connected the dots between different physics principles of movement like elastic recoil, stacking your body in a coil so it can spring back out of the ground, the weight of the head. So I've noticed lately the reason I wanted to talk to you is, first of all, you're a hugely influential person who got the rope flow movement a lot of visibility. You're helping people mass adoption of some of these elite movement principles that professional athletes have been using. And I saw you recently posting about two different things. One is your ProPulse Power Vest, because I have tried a regular old weighted vest and meh, but I'm really fussy because I've had the experience of West African dance where everything has a lightness to it and a uh and not this cement like feeling. So I want to talk about that invention because yours is very different than a regular old weight vest. And then also I know you were working on a book and I want to dive into what triggered you into action on that. So I want to start with the vest because I know from my years in design or product design research that something that's a physical thing takes a lot more commitment. You have to spec it out and test it and then do the specs for the production facility. And so that took a lot of effort. So I like to start with what made you realize this new invention was worth all that effort.
Well, it stemmed back from 2010. That's when I discovered a position with the hands where I'm triangulating the bone structure. I'm not folding, I'm not bending the last digit. I instantly recognized that, wow, I can capture that force that resolves it back into my body. It doesn't get sort of cut off. And then I started punching down and just jolting myself off the ground. And then instantly my mind went to Deion Sanders. This is how he runs. Like I could see it in my mind's eye. And I started doing it. I started teaching it. And then it was the search for, okay, well, what is there a tool that can both teach it and train it? So learn the patterning to do it and then develop the body's tissues to be able to do it stronger and stronger. And so the concept of the weight shifting was really the key because when that weight is in the process of shifting, the body experiences no inertia. So you're able to stop against essentially nothing and then experience a jolt. And that's what creates the connective tissue recoil and that fascial response that is free, more powerful, more fun. And once you start to cue into it, you see it everywhere. And even a person who's not a very good runner they'll bounce their hands in a jog. And so it's very natural. So when you land, there is no burden from this extra weight because it immediately goes into free travel where you don't experience it. And then it hits and dynamite explodes back up so that you get an assist at launch. And when we did the force plate testing with force plates and treadmills and really tried to unpack how is this thing working, we found that on the force plate there was a less impactful peak impact force. So it's remarkably gentle on the joints. And that's why it really is for everyone. But you are managing more weight, more mass, and it doesn't keep you on the ground any longer. So whatever your ground contact time is, it's your ground contact time with it. So you are getting the additional weight, that mass, which creates the force, but you're dividing by the same time coefficient. And so you are creating more power. And what we're finding is that athletes get faster and your knees don't hurt. So it is, I believe that it's bigger than the BOSU ball. Really, what it is it makes athletes faster and it reduces joint pain. And because we're tamping down that peak impact force, this is the best foot training device I have ever experienced. So you can strategically get into the toes, you can do a lot of volume, and the feet, that's where all the long tendons are. So in the human body, it's elbows out and knees down is where the springy long tendon, the tendon is longer than the muscle. And if I just strengthen the muscles of the feet without getting the resilience of the tendons, now I can actually create more problems because all that force gets concentrated into a muscle belly as opposed to transmitted through tendons. So I think it's my biggest concept, but I've got insoles on the way. We're prototyping that ultimately footwear will be my biggest, category. So anyway, it's a long answer, but we've arrived at it, and it always takes longer than you would like, but this one's worth the wait. WEIGHT.
Oh my goodness, David. Wow, this interview is going to cost me the price of a ProPulse Power Vest because I am sold. But I'm such a nerd. So audience, you might not be in the weeds as deeply as definitely not David, but myself either. The once I aligned with the higher power called gravity, I realized that we are not meant to struggle against gravity if we partner with it and we listen to it. And when I learned some amazing statistic about the power of the recoil from a tendon being exponentially more than the recoil from a muscle, I was like, wow, no wonder people in the gym, a lot of them are not getting the elastic recoil. We can look at a flying squirrel land, we can look at a puma pounce, we can look at the in Africa, we can see the Maasai people just pulse their weight into the ground and fly. We can look at antelopes. Is it the springbok? And they just pulse into the ground and they're just floating. This giant animal with skinny, teeny little legs just floating across the land. So we know this idea of using the fascial slings and getting this elastic recoil is a supple kind of strength, but it's also very precise. If our feet are all messed up, the Achilles isn't wound, and then you're already losing your biggest partner in recycling gravity. And the other thing you're saying when you're talking about the energy leaks, right? You're triangulating, and our whole body is a series of curved triangles, right? And you found that triangulation in your hands, and I can't even do it. Okay, I bet I can. But I in West African dance, our hands are always making these kind of motions or these kind of, and martial arts too, right? There's this, you're coiling up so that your whole body is behaving as one powerful connected force from the ground to your crown through your fingertips. So guys, if there's any way we can just cut out energy leaks, whether it's a floppy arm where your arm gets straight and your fingers are straight and it's just flopping out. That was my biggest African dance mistake. I would let it kind of flop out of my neck or flop out of my hands without being really wound in and with better tension. So that's incredible that it reduces, it teaches you how to use your feet.
Well, yeah, it trains your feet, and in the process, there's different strategies for different styles of locomotion. So what you do with your toes in a sprint is the opposite of what you'll do for covering long distances.
Can you cover that a little bit more? Because I've gotten a lot of people excited about, they see me, they think I'm running or jogging, and I'm like, no. I'm never letting my heel come close to the ground because I'm very forefoot heavy. Can you talk a little bit about those differences and how this affects those?
Yeah, so let me just go back and make one comment, because this is the most important factor, is creating systemic tensional balance throughout the entire system. And the force actually comes from the crown to the feet and the floor first. So the delivery of force is how we get it from the ground up. And so ground up is page 2, but page 1 is the pitch. Exactly. And that
Guys,
is
I
just,
just need to pause on that. So
yeah,
it's this wave like whip down.
it's always down before up because that's the physical law. And unless you comprehend that, you can miss the most important step, which is if you're going straight, the head will land above the foot with the coiling core. So the center of mass goes straight, which is the fastest points between A and B. But systemically, the body is now in perfect balance so that you can deliver the quality pitch where home runs are easy. So if you're throwing knuckleballs to yourself and everyone's, a little bit off, you won't be able to express from the ground up with that efficiency.
And
And so,
to
yeah,
help all of us remember this, gravity is constantly pulling down. And so, and I that's one reason I'm I learned about waves and elastic recoil from some really evolved movement training, with the Axis syllabus and with Ido Portal's, but it being so
yes,
directed through the tensional system. And as I watched the runners, like their eyes would stay level, but there's that
yes,
little, yeah,
this,
and
yep,
this tiny bit, because
yeah,
and once I learned that to move straight requires the most rotational, like coordination of all the rotational forces of the body, it made sense for why the training for this would be very different. So, and that's one of the things about your vest. It's not a linear, like, the weight vest is landing at a linear pace. And that's one thing that you'll see with really well tension dancers is the like different body parts building up, and then what is it, lead lag, part goes up, part goes up, part goes up, part goes, and then the whole thing the spring. So go right ahead, David. I interrupted.
Oh, no problem. So anyway, that is the number one priority is the vertical integrity, the integrity of vertical force transmitting through the body so you can deliver it, receive it, express it. Now, when it comes time to the strategies for the feet, what we want when we are sprinting is we want to kick the foot up. And the miscue is often raise your knees up. So raising your knees up is not the cue. That's the byproduct of the gait cycle, but it's foot kicking up that and think forward with the knee is the intent. And then it will come up and look like the knee is coming high because it does, but it's the consequence of the correct intent that will be fastest and most efficient. So the strategy with the toes in a sprint is to curl but not clench. So basically, what we're having is the foot comes down, it's going to land on that fourth and fifth metatarsal sprinting. So that's leveraging the power of the heel whilst not loading the heel because it routes directly to here. And then the toe in this curled but not clenched experiences that force there, which biomechanically will help kick the foot up is where we need it to go to get off the ground as fast as we can. And you're activating the tendons that connect to the tips of the toes, which connect to muscles that are underneath the gastroc, the soleus. So when you don't do that and you're trying to go your fastest, you're not buttressing the soleus and the gastroc from underneath. And that is less powerful, it's not as fast, and it's not as resilient. So you're putting too much load on the Achilles tendon by means of not pressurizing soleus and gastroc. And so that is the strategy. You can think like cat-like. The cat's claws are retractable. They have that give and take. So now let's talk about covering long horizontal distance, which is actually a much more practiced activity in the history of humankind because you can't catch a rabbit and you can't outrun a tiger. So it was weaponry in the form of a stick, a stone, and a rope that were the technological advances that allowed us to put those animals in the zoo and, on the dinner table. So to go 7 hours to catch that whatever, because we sweat and we have, this vertical biomechanical efficiency, then the toes want to be extended and splayed because that does not impede the horizontal progress. So in distance, I want to have the foot on the ground where I'm getting the projection horizontally and I'm more on the back side, as we would call it, whereas sprinting, I need to be on the front side. And we define the body as just external and internal torsion, as opposed to, oh, I have transverse, I have sagittal, I have coronal or frontal, because that disjointed approach, while useful to understand the space we, exist in, it's not instructive. And if you start using it instructively and think, oh, this is a transverse exercise, this is, whatever exercise, you're not cultivating this thing that's very complex. And like you said prior to the call, it's calculus, it's not arithmetic. Calculus is the study of the rate of change, and it's that Fibonacci-esque spiral that, is the divine design of the human body. You can see correlation and continuity with natural design in the human body, and you see it in everything natural. So understanding how you want to use your body. So going up a hill, you want to create run up and not rise up, because if I just kick my foot up, I didn't go up the hill. I sent my body up without the forward progress. And then if I'm coming down the hill, the most efficient way to do it is to keep on one side, the same side, where I regulate the vertical displacement of my center of mass. So going up a hill it's rotational. I kick up and I kick up. So I'm getting upward progress. But when I'm going down, I don't want my center of mass to be going up and down, because now I'm beating my body up. And if you had, a large meal you've just consumed, but you had to get over there quickly, the way you can manage that is it's just you stay on the same side. So your, intestines are not doing that. You're sort of more honing in like this. And picture someone, with a rifle trying to clear a room. It's this same side where I can keep the barrel perfect here, as opposed to sort of doing this that wouldn't be conducive to that activity. So structure and function are always going to be related. And when the function changes, we have to use the structure in a manner that will execute that task. But the function is governed by the structure, and then aberrant function will gradually distort and transform the structure. So the structure dictates the function, and the function over time will either reinforce or transform that structure in a positive or negative manner.
When you say aberrant function, and we know we're talking about sedentary bodies, it's almost like we're in an inverted energy system where the forces are sagging down in the middle and flying up on the edges, or where our pelvises are parked forward, which would be more conducive to running backwards. So the idea of realigning with the free energy, that's one thing that you talked about, is the freedom and fun when you get this feeling. And most of us, I remember trudging when I was a jogger, but David, I grew up with toes like this. And I was so duck-footed, I couldn't even hardly walk a mile when they made me in PE. I was so in my head. And so this whole idea of my feet having this new relationship with the ground, that's part of my long-term project here, has been learning how to use my feet. So I can't wait to try the vest. So these are different strategies for different functions. But can you go a little bit more into this aberrant function that so many
Yeah.
of us have adapted to? Because I
Yes.
know in the beginning, if you weren't so inviting and friendly, I would have excluded myself from studying your stuff. I would have been like, oh, and I remember even going to the rotational strength training session down in San Diego. I was like the only late middle-aged lady, and I was sitting around with my poofy belly, and I was like, oh, when's lunch? And everybody else is like, oh, we only eat whole goats and we eat every 2 days. Like I remember just being the one who was the exception. So, and I'm all about our whole tribe getting better. So can you talk a little bit about that aberrant function?
Yes.
And look, I'm wearing your
Hey, look
every
at that.
step stronger, guys. Everything that we're talking about in its own way applies to all human movement. And
Yes.
walking is one baseline. It's like the one we all as important as human beings, the most
Well,
frequently used.
okay, so yeah, I'll talk about the aberrant postures and movement, but if you think about it, air is the priority, breathing is number one. Then you need water and you need food, but how do you get water and food? It is locomotion that becomes the second most important function, only superseded by breathing. And aberrant function is tend to look at it from the side, and you have the, the slump shoulders, the neck here, the pelvis sort of, too far forward, that computer posture, whatever it is. That is instructive, but it is less corrective than looking at function from the front, where you are creating the coil that will determine balance. Because I could have perfect posture from the side, but if I move my body with this straight, stiff spine, head stuck in the middle, I have to walk on a tightrope to make that balanced. So if your feet are just that far apart, most people are going to be somewhere near the midline where this foot and this foot, they can be anywhere like that. Some people walk with that overlap. And if you're on a runway, the women will walk with, they'll cross over the line so that they can keep themselves here. It's still a slight figure eight to raise the hip, lower the shoulder on this side, it raises the hip, and you can make it very hippie, so hips doing it, so that you get that, feminine ideal. But the guy on the runway, he's not walking like this. His feet are here so he can have that strut and that swag. Okay. And the best way to correct this, from the side position that looks, the S curve isn't as nice as it could be, is understanding the front and optimizing the coiling action. And what we do in training is you go to the fullest degree of polarity. And we'll talk about my next huge discovery, which I'm calling the fascial fist. So, whilst the core fist and its iterations are all about the bone structure, because the fascia really just suspends and surrounds and supports the bones. The bones are the strong elements. Your bones are strong when you got the flu, and they're strong when you're happy and healthy. But this here creates the greatest continuity for achieving the longest possible polarity on one side. So I'm removing all muscle slack by spiraling and ringing this position. And then to get to the most coiled position, you can keep this axis here, call it move without moving. And now you go to the external torsion to the extreme, and depending upon where you park the elbow, it will either be an internal torsion or an external torsion. But the the objective of the training is to not let one muscle cell be on slack on the long side. And this is a anatomical structural end game position. So there is no other position that gives me the relationship between the thumb and the fourth finger, the ring finger, and the technique is called ringing with a W. And you have the ring finger. And across culture and time, there is a lot of mysticism, and there's a lot of, sort of, wow, the ring finger is very special. Which one do you put the wedding band on? Right. So this idea of the fullest length fascial integration, if I'm not achieving it, well, then I'm not using the hands as a tool to educate and inform the proximal body. And you use the hands as this tool to create the two differentiations in terms of long and strong coil to educate proximal, and then catch a football, or do whatever you got to do with the hands. But you've bridged that understanding, that capacity to be perfect through proximal, and by going to polarity, you get everything in between. And if I don't go to polarity, well, I don't have the same bandwidth to do everything optimally. So you will actually be better in the contracted short via getting to the longest on the other side. So if I don't go long, I cannot compress into coil optimally. That will create a greater that. And it's just so basic and so simple. So I had a guy come in who did a documentary on alternative training methods, and he was great. And the very first thing he opened up with was, I know that this functional training is really complex and complicated, so it takes a long time to understand it. And I said, well, actually, 30 seconds from now, you're going to move better. I brought him over to the wall, create the differentiation. I'm creating it now like this because it's even longer. But suddenly, once his body experienced that polarity, he walked off with better balance. And so it's actually much simpler than anyone would have you believe, because all you need is the center X on the map. And then you don't drill different, you just drill deeper on center. So that's sort of the explanation for the foundation of WeckMethod, which is the coiling core training that begets the rotational movement training, where you're just simply crossing over to mid, and then the bilateral torsion, which then is used into the different coil. And by virtue of going to these depths that can't be achieved unless you differentiate, you come back to the center, and now the center is stronger too. Joe Sullivan is a world record setting squat, powerlifting athlete. And once he discovered the coil, world record 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 went up easier. 5, 6, 7, 8 went up easier and heavier than prior to establishing, bring it together for a better bilateral relationship to lift heavier weights.
I like how you express that it's simpler than it could be. A lot of things are marketed as very complex, it's esoteric, you need a blah 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 degree. And one thing that as a culture we seem to be suffering from is this isolation and fragmentation, and you know uh hyper focusing in myopically to one spot. And I remember when I was in San Diego with you and Chris, I remember saying something, well, what about rib flare? And they were like, no, you just get these end range slings tensioned up and that works itself out. And I remember kind of not believing it because I was so used to wrecking myself doing so many. And honestly, that's another topic, which is in my opinion, there's a hypermobility epidemic, at least amongst all these women like myself that did so much stretching and so much yoga, and it was leaning into our existing strengths of being able to like unfortunately over mobilize joints and then therefore destabilize them. And I only learned about how bad ligament laxity is for the nervous system many years later. And I was like, oh, I can't believe what I was doing to myself in the name of health. And so I wanted to go back to that idea of the simplicity. If you like, you're talking about going all, tensioning all the way on one polarity, meaning one direction all the way out, could be one word that we could use if we were talking about maybe a infinity symbol, all the way out in one direction of the curve, and then things pass through that center, and then they go all the way out on the other end of the curve. And actually, both polarities are often present at the same time, whether it's one side is coiled in and one is coiled out. So and that's one thing I have a hard time expressing to my student is this spring idea of when the coil is all the way loaded up in walking or running, that it's really one thing. It's really
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing, but it looks, what is that adage about an elephant? 12 blind people describing an elephant. Oh, it's furry, it's hard and shiny. It's got, it's pokey. So I think these organic design principles, since we're used to describing a flat world and we're used to using flat imagery, and our brain likes, the reductionist thinking likes to oversimplify, but these organic principles are really one set of things turning and one. Okay, so what would you say if you knew someone who was hypermobile? Like, I never, once I started to have that feeling that something was holding me within myself. Like, that lightness where you see Fred Astaire or somebody and they're just suspended in gravity. I would say that these type of techniques are more important than ever for people with hypermobility. What would you say about that?
Well, basically, with length, the necessary quality that has to accompany that is strength. So the hypermobile, let's just take an example, that is super strong through that hypermobility just because your skeleton, was designed that your elbow can straighten more than straight. As long as it's strong, you get the protective factor and then true to the vertical integrity. So if I have a laxity in a joint and I am now restricted and compensating for a lack of vertical integrity, well, then that becomes most likely the compensation point that now experiences the trauma, the failure, the injury. So it really is about, if you relate to gait and you get the gait to be perfectly balanced, it can actually deal with structural imbalance that might not even be correctable. But because the force transmission is clean, it might not matter that one hip is, a half an inch higher than the other, because it's never having to compensate in that exchange of the movement. And to get back to the simplicity of it, if you walk with your head over your foot, you are there when you get there. You are there when you get there. And you can even stop and go back because you're not committed to falling forward and recovering your balance, falling in. And that's the definition in the textbook, is that, walking is, this thing where you sort of commit yourself to the next fall and then you recover from the fall. And there's not an animal on the planet without the same intellect as us that moves so stupidly. And we're the smart ones who now are, scientifically moving stupidly, instructed to do so just through the ignorance of you didn't actually observe and experience the reality. You were theoretical in your head. You thought, okay, for lifting this weight, I need that. And that means that these joints bear the burden. And therefore, I need to do that and be stable. It's the least stable way to move. And fortunately, this is finally, we're 2 decades into like the scientific stiffness of the spine being what you want. Before it wasn't science, it was just brace your core and 90-90 cheek to cheek. So they didn't cite a scientific study until 2 decades ago, when now we had the science to prove that this, incorrect, inefficient instruction was, scientifically valid. And, there's a lot of bullying that goes on in the fitness industry and sports performance. Because if you have to market your services as the best, otherwise, if I'm an athlete trainer and I say, oh, I'm second best, the guy across the street's better, but I'm cheaper and I'm nicer, Well, no one's going to come to you. So you have the burden of telling the marketplace that you're the best. And if you're the best, well, that means the guy across the street, he ain't the best. And so you create these little fiefdoms and no communication. And I sought to cut through all that nonsense by saying, I don't want to be the top of the mountain. I'm going to be underneath all of you. And that means whatever you're the best or you're the best, I don't care how you guys want to sort that out. I'm giving you a foundation so that you're actually better, regardless of what your style, system, brand, whatever is. So it was the wisdom to say, I'm not lording over anyone. I am uplifting everyone. And I'm as competitive as they come. So I treat that very seriously, so seriously that if I'm wrong, snap your fingers, tell me what's right. I'm on right. I will never defend the defenseless because that isn't enduring and you cannot be foundational if one aspect of your philosophy and practices is incorrect.
Yes,
And all
David,
we do is put principles into practice. That's all we do. And you're living proof because it's gorgeous. The slow motion, you can see how perfect this stride is. From the front, it's perfect, and from the side, it's perfect. And it's very inspiring with, that dress that's waving through the air in slow motion. It looks like the expression of pure joy.
David, thank you. And I want to harp on that foundation principle because if the foundation is off, everything above is crooked. And I have to say, what as a coach, what I finally harp on the most is anything that's foundational. If it's a tested and true pattern that you can find in the very best movers, if the very best movers, the animal kingdom, our ancestors, the toddlers, the elite athletes who are low injury, if that pattern works, then let's start from there. Let's not start from this assumption that something has to work for a body that's been trapped in a chair, and we need to lower the standards so that the stiff neck is able to pick up the heavy weight and further drive in the the existing dysfunction. Like let's break out of that limited cultural lens, whether it's from the academic or the marketing. Let's break out of that and look at the timeless, which are when something really works. We need to study when something really works and then derive what is the adaptation path. One other thing that
Yeah.
you said too was how I think we talked a little bit about adaptation. We are the smartest, but we're the stupidest. We come out unfinished. We're half baked on purpose so that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can super
Plastic.
adapt. What?
We're very plastic. And there was a Ukrainian girl who was put out in the backyard with the dogs at, infancy and grew up to be, 12 years old or whatever. And she was a dog. She walked on all fours, ate with her mouth, barked and things because we are so plastic. And we learn just through the mirror imaging, mirror neurons, and positive and negative reinforcement. And what I would say about toddlers is there are certain developmental stages where you're going to roll over, then you're going to lift your head, then you're going to sort of coil to create progress easily. But the reason we call them toddlers is because the process to get it to vertical isn't perfect, and their body structure is differentiated in terms of the segments and the size and the ratio, that it's fundamentally different than the adult, and their bone structure is very soft and pliable, which is so forgiving because they're going to fall a lot. And then that person, depending upon where they are, surrounded by who they are, will gravitate to however it's done. So if you grow up and everybody's walking on all fours, you're going to walk on all fours because that what was imprinted upon you. You're born in China, you're likely to speak Chinese. You're born in France, you're likely to speak French. You're born in America in the South, you're likely to have that Southern accent because that's all it is. And, you know, when you watch a baby, a toddler, an infant squat, well, if you're against butt wink, then none of them do it right because they all roll under with the butt. So I think what happens is we sort of fantasize this ideal and that we were corrupted and like, oh, you came into the world on. No, you came into the world a blank slate. And then you were either corrupted or to some extent or educated, to do it right. And left to its own devices, the athletic intelligence has the capacity to govern over incorrect intent. So Michael Johnson, one of the greatest sprinters ever, he would say himself that he didn't move his head. No movement. I had everything perfect. From the side, it appears to be that way, but as soon as you look at the front, he's here because he wants to win the race, and God gave him a structure that functions best with that balance. And we can look at movement training at its fundamental essence is just the art and science of shifting your
Wait.
weight. And one of the reasons why I don't really place any real importance on assessing your standing posture is because that's one fixed position. What's the best position? Well, it's actually your next position. That's what defines if you're balanced. So standing ramrod straight, consciously thinking I have to be here, here, there, I just think that's a fool's errand. And like, let's move the body the way it was meant to be moved, and let's assess the position. Let's move and let's assess the position. Let's evaluate how you shift your weight as opposed to, some definition on a grid that can be useful for an evaluation of can you be in that rectangular shoulders over hips, over knees, over feet? Like, can you do it? But the fix is not some adjust that position, oh, now you're standing right, because that has no sticky power whatsoever. That's in the moment with the therapist, moving you here and there. And it doesn't correlate to shifting your weight with balance and efficiency unless you're doing this. So I just, the frustration that I have, having been the guy, the lucky mouse who got dropped in a bucket of cream, the BOSU Ball success, the mailbox money, the thousands of hours of free time. I get to do what I want. And what I want is to overcome my athletic inadequacy so I can beat a better man in a race and in a fight fundamentally, and then sports after that. And that is my passion, and it is in my interest to share it with the better men, the better women, so they can put it on display so that the less athletic have a chance. And I look at the pro athlete, the aspirational one, they're a neon sign, be like Mike. And that's what validates it and inspires the rest. And I would much rather help billions of regular people than millions of athletes. But I want to help everyone. And that's the universality of it is what makes it true. If it only worked for great athletes, it didn't work for regular people. Well, guess what? It's not true.
Wow, I'm writing down so many things. Yeah, if it only works for elite athletes but not regular people, it's not true. That's a soundbite. And one thing that you also alluded to is we are sometimes following very poor instructions.
Oh my gosh.
I remember being told, yeah, we're falling, we're catching ourselves as we fall forward. And the idea when I think it was, I'm pretty sure it came from you. That's why I'm wearing your Every Step Stronger shirt. From a separate discipline, I learned about the idea of, not dropping everything as one heavy block. I learned about segmentation, whether I drop a hand and then a shoulder and then a head, to make something, the weight transfer smoother. So I already knew this idea of smooth weight transfer, but only as an aesthetic. Oh, you're dancing. Let's make it look light. And it seemed detached from the reality of everyday life. And when you pointed out that there's this segmental shift that results in this coil, and that at every moment you're balanced, every single moment, I was like, oh, that's what the Tai Chi people are trying to say. That's what the Qigong people are trying to say. But we've settled for this idea that we're going to fall, and that our nervous system should just be ready for some catastrophe to happen at all times, versus this idea of the smooth animal, supple, doesn't have these jerky, out of control feelings, that you can stack yourself up in this coil. And it's also very powerful. I end up in positions I'm like, I could definitely hurt someone. I
Yeah.
can feel like, oh, since I mostly have female students over 50, we do our Charlie's Angels. I'm like, let's get all Charlie's Angels. So is there something else you wanted to say about
Well,
the universality of these healthy physics
yeah,
weights of
I right. So I have a fundamental principle that I call both sides utilized, and it's sort of
BOSU?
well, BOSU is where I got it. At first it was both sides up, and then I met Dean Brittenham, sort of understood his practices, and that's when it morphed into both sides utilized. It's not about the tool, it's about the body. And the both sides utilized is as it applies to, let's compare the slow shifting of weight like the Tai Chi or like a walking stride versus sprinting. It is both sides utilized. So with sprinting, you want to run in the air so that you are violently in that one moment that might only be 0.08 seconds of opportunity to interact with the ground because that's faster. You want it to all come together for the event to be the most powerful. We say violent, but violent with that structural integrity isn't violent internally for you, right? It's violent in terms of your interaction with the ground. Everything's come together. And that's just fundamentally different than both legs weighted to some percent. So let's say I'm here and I'm 99% weighted, but this is touching the ground. The key is now that pour it out over into the other side. And then the key in Tai Chi is how do you solve the riddle that you are never 50-50? Because 50-50 can only move up and down in the present. If you want to move and you're 50-50 and you want to move fast, you have to establish the weight to get a transfer. And so I studied Tai Chi a long time, and I still sort of use it as my fundamental guiding principles. And Bruce Lee is the sort of the pinnacle of the strategic employment of movement and martial. You absorb what is useful, you discard what is not, and then you add what is uniquely your own. And unless you follow that principle, you have a weakness and a deficiency where you didn't avail yourself the opportunity to learn what you can draw that is useful from any given style. And if you just fight and you don't know grappling, well, guess what? You're going to lose to grappling. If you fight and you don't know striking, well, guess what? You're going to get beat from striking. So it really is about rounding everything out. And let's say you have one arm. Well, then you have to, add what's uniquely your own to use what you have. And I, the frustration that I have is this lack of clarity and simplicity within the industry. And in a way, I don't blame them because you only learn what you learn in the beginning from other people before you start synthesizing and making your own discoveries. And just the simple burden of delivering a cohesive session with a beginning, a middle, and an end means that you have very little leeway to explore outside of the paradigm that you've been educated in because you have to deliver a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the perception has to be that I'm doing exactly what I need to do in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And now there's no room for me to sort of figure things out. And I literally figure things out.
Yeah.
I understand a structure for any given function, and then the change in the calculus from position to position. And in WeckMethod, it's just position, right? Position, transition. That's the essence of what it is. And if you understand the fundamental position is poised to pounce now, not getting tired, and you establish that on both sides, well, now you have a destination. If you're Evil Knievel and you're going to jump over the Grand Canyon, you need a launch ramp, but just as important, you need a landing ramp. And if the nervous system perceives that there's not a landing ramp, well, guess what? You're going to freak out and bad things are going to happen. And that would be the joint laxity without the commensurate strength and coordination to funnel force to the floor through the fascia, delivered through the feet efficiently.
That's plenty of F's, David.
I like the alliteration.
I love it. And boy, that sparks so many um alignments over here. I was just posting yesterday about everyone should sit down straight and stand down straight, and the universal forces of gravity. This is an inversion of how a lot of people have been trained to think of, which is this, stiffening and tightening and trying versus I liked how you said the best position is the next position. When I do teach people positions, because there are better or more freeing ones than others. The sign of a in my opinion, the sign of a healthy position, a strong position, is it has the most options.
Yeah.
Like from there, you
Yeah.
could breathe better. You could suddenly change direction. You're poised to pounce, in other words, versus settling for these artificially bracing things where you're several steps removed. And that's especially true of never 50-50, the idea. And I know you talked about the expression of an opponent reading your energy or masking your energy in a Tai Chi situation. But one of the places I see the most where we're fighting ourselves, we're draining our own energy, is people being trained with this 50-50 with their butt in the chair, and then they go 50-50 when they're lifting something up, and then they shear their body with the twist, instead of understanding that you have so many more options once you make those side bending twists and the turns at the hip, and you liberate the spine to be in concert with the way you're using the ground. And the last thing is, people are like, I run barefoots because I'm kind of missing or tore some ligaments in my knee in my 20s. So I have to feel the ground. Like, and that's when I've done African dance. If I feel the ground, I'm safe. I'm recruiting more of myself to be aligned than otherwise. And people go, "Oh, you're going to hurt yourself. You're barefoot on that treadmill." I'm like, "Well, I'm only on there for 15 seconds, and I'm directing the force. I am in full control." And when you talked about that word violent, we need to send force through parts of our body for them to stay, to avoid the osteoporosis, and we have all these angled joints, like the head of the femur is on this diagonal. If the pelvis wasn't meant to do these side bending twists, we would be perfectly fine just doing all these square things. But we need to be able to balance the weight on one leg in smooth ways where we're not likely to fall and where we have more agency. So, and and peace. Just there's a huge amount of peace. And I think it was from you. I learned to kind of like punch the ground. I was like, boom. When I got that idea of, I want it to be like one of those pop-up toys that has a little spring and you bring it down.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is like African dance. Last thing, West African dance and the other ancestral dances, there's a lot more leaning. So someone with really, and I recently posted about how it's one of the lowest injury rates in different kinds of dance, and ballet is the highest. And a lot of it is that it's got a lot more biomechanical sense, where if your head is leaning over your foot, your knee is less likely to implode in, and you're less likely to, and so there are so many ways to create this ease and this peace and this power. Oh, last thing, David, we got to go soon. Tell us about your book, please, and why you wrote it.
Yes. Well, again, just real quick, immediacy, right? The concept that right now ready and the immediacy of productive action will be a definition of a good position. So if I'm in a position where I have to change that position to do a productive movement, well, then by definition, I wasn't in the right position to then, accommodate the next position. So my book the title is Every Step Stronger, Your Foundation for Winning at Life. And basically, I take the reader on a journey through invention and entrepreneurship, mental health and bouncing back from disaster, very specific strategies with the hands and the feet. And I hired two ghostwriters who I paid a lot of money to draft through 20, 30 hours of interviews to get all the information and my voice. And from that document, I wrote the book. So it gave me the architecture of an easy, enjoyable read with unique information that says your foundation that is most practical and the activity and the function that you're going to do the most is locomotion. And when you relate to gait with that healthy confidence of being in balance, you now have the foundation to do any and all things better. And this book, I think it will be a bestseller because I have enough of an audience that is, very excited to read it and consume it. And then it becomes word of deed. People who read it and understand it. The chapter 12 is a simple, step into perfect head over foot balance with exercises performed over 3 weeks that can normalize balance. But it it's a timeless book because our biomechanics for the human structure are timeless. And Locomotion 1.0 was our ancestors moving efficiently by necessity. Then it went to locomotion we don't know when the science and the academics sort of misinformed everyone. And this is simply Locomotion 2.0, where we restore the integrity of Locomotion 1.0, but we avail ourselves of modern technology, training tools, and because our day doesn't revolve around going and getting the food and water and bringing it back, which consumes all of your time or most of it, we can indulge in the trivialities of pickleball and tennis and lacrosse and football and martial arts and unarmed combat is completely contrived because if I show up to the fight without a spear or an arrow or a sling, I will lose the fight no matter how good I am with just the body unassisted and leveraging a tool. And you'll hear a trainer, oh, I like natural. I don't like any equipment. Well, how did you have your coffee this morning? Did you sleep in a bed? Did you use a blanket? Do you put on underwear? Like just fundamentally, we are tool users, and that is much more natural than this naked Adam and Eve. Okay, we use nothing. That's not actually natural.
I love it. We're inventors, and you are a prolific inventor, David. I want your book. I want the vest. I'm more excited than ever about this body of work and every step stronger, David. Thank you for coming today. Oh, and your website is weckmethod.com. I'll put
Yes.
links in the notes. Your book, is it going to be there or on Amazon or?
Well, I'm going to go with Amazon first, and that will be the principal distribution. And then with success, that would morph into sort of the Barnes and Noble and the other distributions. And I've already had a bunch of people reach out about, hey, I would like to do the Chinese translation. Hey, I would like to do the Korean translation. Hey, I'd like to do the Spanish translation. So I do believe that it will have worldwide reach because rope flow is a worldwide, rapidly growing movement that I created in 2004 to enhance my own physical prowess and athleticism. And the Rosetta Stone for integrated human movement is a simple piece of rope mastering the four fundamental patterns that involve not jumping through it. And it will coincide with being better at jumping through it when and if you want to do that. But the rotation and the beat and the unified, every molecule of my mass organized to create that ground exchange with absolute perfection. And when the rope is true, so are you.
All right, David Weck. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. It was a wonderful opportunity, and I'm going to ask you for a lot of clips so that we can create little bite-sized, pieces that will intrigue people to watch the whole thing and to take charge of their lives, beginning with physical integrity as the foundation for everything else.
Our whole tribe's stronger. All right. Thanks, David. Bye.
Bye, Deb. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you.